Thursgood's subject, so he consulted the slip of paper. E-A-U-X. First name James. I think he'll do us very well till July. The staff had no difficulty in reading the signals. Jim Brito was a poor white of the teaching community. He belonged to the same sad bunch as the late Mrs. Loveday, who had a Persian lamb coat and stood in for junior divinity until her checks bounced, or the late Mr. Maltby, the pianist who had been called from choir practice to help the police with their inquiries, and as far as anyone knew was helping them to this day, for Maltby's trunk still lay in the cellar awaiting instructions. Several of the staff, but chiefly Marjorie Banks, were in favor of opening that trunk. They said it contained notorious missing treasures. Abrahamian's silver-framed picture of his Lebanese mother, for instance, Best Ingram's Swiss Army penknife, and Matron's watch. But Thursgood set his creaseless face resolutely against their entreaties. Only 5 years had passed since he had inherited the school from his father, but they had taught him already that some things are best locked away. Jim Brito arrived on a Friday in a rainstorm. The rain rolled like gun smoke down the brown combs of the Quantocks, then raced across the empty cricket fields into the sandstone of the crumbling facades. He arrived just after lunch, driving an old red Alphys and towing a second-hand trailer that had once been blue. Early afternoons at Thursgood's are tranquil, a brief truce in the running fight of each school day. The boys are sent to rest in their dormitories. The staff sit in the common room over coffee, reading newspapers or correcting boys' work. Thursgood reads a novel to his mother. Of the whole school, therefore, only little Bill Roach actually saw Jim arrive, saw the steam belching from the Alphys's bonnet as it wheezed its way down the pitted drive, windscreen wipers going full pelt, and the trailer shuddering through the puddles in pursuit. Roach was a new boy in those days and graded dull, if not actually deficient. Thursgood's was his second prep school in 2 terms. He was a fat, round child with asthma, and he spent large parts of his rest kneeling on the end of his bed, gazing through the window. His mother lived grandly in Bath. His father was agreed to be the richest in the school, a distinction which cost the son dear. Coming from a broken home, Roach was also a natural watcher. In Roach's observation, Jim did not stop at the school buildings, but continued across the sweep to the stable yard. He knew the layout of the place already. Roach decided later that he must have made a reconnaissance or studied maps. Even when he reached the yard, he didn't stop but drove straight onto the wet grass, traveling at speed to keep the momentum. Then over the hummock into the dip, head first and out of sight. Roach half expected the trailer to jackknife on the brink. Jim took it so fast, but instead it just lifted its tail and disappeared like a giant rabbit into its hole. The dip is a piece of Thursgood folklore. It lies in a patch of wasteland between the orchard, the fruit house, and the stable yard. To look at, it is no more than a depression in the ground, grass-covered, with hummocks on the northern side, each about boy height, and covered in tufted thickets which in summer grow spongy. It is these hummocks that give the dip its special virtue as a playground and also its reputation, which varies with the fantasy of each new generation of boys. They are the traces of an open-cast silver mine, says one year, and digs enthusiastically for wealth. They are a Romano-British fort, says another, and stages battles with sticks and clay missiles. To others, the dip is a bomb crater from the war, and the hummocks are seated bodies buried in the blast. The truth is more prosaic. 6 years ago, and not long before his abrupt elopement with the receptionist from the Castle Hotel, Thurgood's father had launched an appeal for a swimming pool and persuaded the boys to dig a large hole with a deep and a shallow end. But the money that came in was never quite enough to finance the ambition, so it was frittered away on other schemes, such as a new projector for the art school and a plan to grow mushrooms in the school cellars, and even, said the cruel ones, to feather a nest for certain illicit lovers when they eventually took flight to Germany, the lady's native home. Jim was unaware of these associations. The fact remains that by sheer luck he had chosen the one corner of Thurgood's Academy which, as far as Roach was concerned, was endowed with supernatural properties. Roach waited at the window but saw nothing more. Both the Alvis and the trailer were in dead ground, and if it hadn't been for the wet red tracks across the grass, he might have wondered whether he had dreamed the whole thing. But the tracks were real, so when the bell went for their end of rest, he put on his rubber boots and trudged through the rain to the top of the dip and peered down, and there was Jim dressed in an army raincoat and a quite extraordinary hat, broad-brimmed like a safari hat, but hairy, with one side pinned up in a rakish piratical curl, and the water running off it like a gutter. The Alvis was in the stable yard. Roach never knew how Jim spirited it out of the dip, but the trailer was right down there at what should have been the deep end, bedded on platforms of weathered brick, and Jim was sitting on the step drinking from a green plastic beaker and rubbing his right shoulder as if he had banged it on something, while the rain poured off his hat. Then the hat lifted, and Roach found himself staring at an extremely fierce red face, made still fiercer by the shadow of the brim and by a brown mustache washed into fangs by the rain. The rest of the face was crisscrossed with jagged cracks, so deep and crooked that Roach concluded in another of his flashes of imaginative genius that Jim had once been very hungry in a tropical place and filled up again since. The left arm still lay across his chest, the right shoulder was drawn high against his neck, but the whole tangled shape of him was stock still. He was like an animal frozen against its background, a stag, thought Roach on a hopeful impulse, something noble. "Who the hell are you?" asked a very military voice. "Sir, Roach, sir, I'm a new boy." For a moment longer, the brick face surveyed Roach from the shadow of the hat. Then, to his intense relief, its features relaxed into a wolfish grin. The left hand, still clapped over the right shoulder, resumed its slow massage, while at the same time he managed a long pull from the plastic beaker. "New boy, eh?" Jim repeated into the beaker, still grinning. "Well, that's a lucky break, I will say." Rising now and turning his crooked back on Roach, Jim set to work on what appeared to be a detailed study of the trailer's four legs, a very critical study that involved much rocking of the suspension and much tilting of the strangely garbed head, marbles anymore. We did when I was at school. Roach had no marble, but Abrahamian had a whole collection flown in from Beirut. It took Roach about 50 seconds to race back to the school, secure one against the wildest undertakings, and return panting to the dip. There he hesitated, for in his mind the dip was already Jim's, and Roach required leave to descend it. But Jim had disappeared into the trailer, so having waited a moment, Roach stepped gingerly down the bank and offered the marble through the doorway. Jim didn't spot him at once. He was sipping from the beaker and staring out the window at the black clouds as they tore this way and that over the Quantocks. This sipping movement, Roach noticed, was actually quite difficult, for Jim could not easily swallow standing up straight. He had to tilt his whole twisted trunk backward to achieve the angle. Meanwhile, the rain came on really hard again, rattling against the trailer like gravel. "Sir," said Roach, but Jim made no move. "Trouble with an Alvis is no damn springs," said Jim at last, more to the window than to his visitor. "You drive along with your rump on the white line, eh? Cripple anybody." And tilting his trunk again, he drank. "Yes, sir," said Roach, much surprised that Jim should assume he was a driver. Jim had taken off his hat. His sandy hair was close cropped. There were patches where someone had gone too low with the scissors. These patches were mainly on one side, so that Roach guessed that Jim had cut the hair himself with his good arm, which made him even more lopsided. "I brought you a marble," said Roach. "Very good of you. Thanks, old boy." Taking the marble, he slowly rolled it around his hard, powdery palm, and Roach knew at once that he was very skillful at all sorts of things, that he was the kind of man who lived on terms with tools and objects generally. "Not level, you see, Bill," he confided, still intent upon the marble. "Skewy, like me. Watch," and turned purposefully to the larger window. A strip of aluminum beading ran along the bottom, put there to catch the condensation. Laying the marble in it, Jim watched it roll to the end and fall on the floor. "Skewy," he repeated, listing in the stern. "Can't have that, can we? Hey, where'd you get to, you little brute?" The trailer was not a homey place, Roach noticed, stooping to retrieve the marble. It might have belonged to anyone, though it was scrupulously clean. A bunk, a kitchen chair, a ship stove, a Keller gas cylinder. Not even a picture of his wife, thought Roach, who had not yet met a bachelor, with the exception of Mr. Thursgood. The only personal things he could find were a webbing kit bag hanging from the door, a set of sewing things stored beside the bunk, and a homemade shower made from a perforated biscuit tin and neatly welded to the roof. And on the table, one bottle of colorless drink, gin or vodka, because that was what his father drank when Roach went to his flat for the weekends and the holidays. "East-west looks okay, but north-south is undoubtedly skewy," Jim declared, testing the other window ledge. "What are you good at, Bill?" "I don't know, sir," said Roach woodenly. "Got to be good at something, surely. Everyone is. How about football? Are you good at football, Bill?" "No, sir," said Roach. "Are you a grind, then?" Jim asked carelessly, as he lowered himself with a short grunt onto the bed and took a pull from the beaker. "You don't look a grind, I must say," he added politely, "although you're a loner." "I don't know," Roach repeated, and moved half a pace towards the open door. "What's your best thing, then?" He took another long sip. "Must be good at something, Bill. Everyone is. My best thing was ducks and drakes. Cheers." Now this was an unfortunate question to ask of Roach just his bed and tidying his clothes seemed to be beyond his reach. Also, he lacked piety. Old Mrs. Thursgood had told him so. He screwed up his face too much at chapel. He blamed himself very much for these shortcomings, but most of all he blamed himself for the breakup of his parents' marriage, which he should have seen coming and taken steps to prevent. He even wondered whether he was more directly responsible, whether, for instance, he was abnormally wicked or divisive or slothful, and that his bad character had wrought the rift. At this last school he had tried to explain this by screaming and feigning fits of cerebral palsy, which his aunt had. His parents conferred, as they frequently did in their reasonable way, and changed his school. Therefore this chance question, leveled at him in the cramped trailer by a creature at least halfway to divinity, a fellow solitary at that, brought him suddenly very near disaster. He felt the heat charging to his face. He watched his spectacles mist over, and the trailer began to dissolve in a sea of grief. Whether Jim noticed this, Roach never knew, for suddenly he had turned his crooked back on him, moved away to the table, and was helping himself from the plastic beaker while he threw out saving phrases. "You are a good watcher anyway, I'll tell you that for nothing, old boy. Us singles always are. No one to rely on, what? Nobody else spotted me. Gave me a real turn up there parked in the horizon. Thought you were a juju man. Best watcher in the unit, Bill Roach is, I'll bet. Long as he's got his specs on, what?" "Yes," Roach agreed gratefully. "I am." "Well, you stay here and watch then," Jim commanded, clamping the safari hat back on his head, "and I'll slip outside and trim the legs. Do that." "Yes, sir." "Where's the damn marble?" "Here, sir." "Call out when she moves, right? North, south, whichever way she rolls. Understand?" "Yes, sir." "Know which way's